So I saw Weapons on Sunday, and I'm going to talk about it because I don't think people are quite catching what Zach Cregger's throwing out there. You know, I think he's taking some wild big swings with this film, getting into some crazy things. It's maybe a statement about everything that's going on right now politically in society. You don't have to interpret it that way. You can just view it as a silly little horror film. And in fact, I'd recommend you go into this movie blind and form your own opinions and interpretations of it before you come back and listen to someone like me talk about it. That being said, there's going to be some spoilers and things like that, so if you don't want that, maybe get the hell out of here. So going into this movie, within the first 20 minutes, you got Josh Brolin in a dream sequence, and he's looking for his missing kid, and they throw an AR-15 in the sky at 2:17. Kids disappear overnight. This all happens very early in the movie, and immediately my brain space is like, oh, okay, this is an allegory for school shootings, mass shootings. But it isn't really. That's just like a small part of it. This movie is about so much more, and as in reality, that's just one of many issues, distractions it puts in front of you to try and kind of like steer you away from the main theme of this movie, which is, of course, the character Gladys and what they represent. We'll get into it. Any good genre film, any good horror film, there's always a little more going on than what meets the eye, whether we're talking about a statement on race or paranoia and conformity, or what this movie talks about, which is consumerism and control. There's always a little bit more going on than what's directly presented to you on screen. A little bit of social commentary there. If you're talking about a movie like this, any decently made film, anything that aspires to be a piece of art, a lot of thought goes into the production design and colors and stuff like that. All the main characters, all the good people, they're wearing blues and whites and earth tones, greens and browns, sometimes yellow, steady colors, working class people. The only time you really see red in this movie is with Gladys or when there's violence. So let's start with the principal character, Marcus. Now, Marcus is the head of the school. He's an authority figure. Later on, there's a scene with him and his husband, and I think they're meant to represent traditional American values fused with modern American values. You know, they're gay, but at the same time, they're wearing Mickey Mouse t-shirts, eating hot dogs. You know, what's more American about that? Prior to that scene, they're out in the grocery store making insignificant choices between Fruity Pebbles and Berry Pebbles. It's like what George Carlin used to talk about, you know, in America, you don't really have a choice. You have the illusion of choice, which is enough to keep most people happy, content, and compliant. Until one day, maybe it's not enough and something makes you snap and go crazy. Everyone in this film is a consumer of something. Miss Candy with alcohol, the homeless man with drugs, and of course Gladys is a consumer of people. And that's kind of the thing this movie does. It just represents all these different aspects of American society. Each character is a different aspect or a different profession. It's all pretty on the nose. You know, you got your policeman, you got your teacher character who's maybe, she's got a heart of gold, but maybe she's a little bit promiscuous or whatever, or slightly self-centered. Who cares? All the characters aren't one-note characters. They all got little shades of gray. Then you got the archer, down-to-earth construction guy. He ends up, I think it's implied, or at least that he ends up riding Witch on the teacher's car. And I appreciate that because I think that's meant to represent like text and social media and these things that we use to communicate now, but there's no cell phones in this movie. They're not throwing it in your face, and I really do appreciate that because when you write something on someone's car or you write something on Instagram or Facebook, there's a bit of an anonymity there, you know? In real life, when they interact, you almost become friends at some point, or he tries to save her or whatever, because it's real life. Writing words on the car is just bullshit. It's just like social media, you know, it's not real life. It's removed from real life. There's like a level of distance there. So I appreciate referencing that without having to throw stupid ass cell phones into this movie. He's talking about building a house, you know. We were supposed to order green paint. Green represents vitality, but he ordered red paint because his emotions are seeping through. He's very emotional. You know, everybody in this movie's emotional about the fact that the children have disappeared. Have they really disappeared though? No. They're all in a basement somewhere. And that's because I think what this movie's trying to say is that our children are going to be checking out. You know, they're checking out right now. Social media, technology, all that kind of stuff. However you want to look at it, but they're not completely there. Parents are searching for them, and then also the parents are, everybody's checking out in this movie. Everybody's under the control, the spell of this Gladys character. Donna beats the shit out of Miss Candy. She's wearing a red shirt. These are things people think about when they're making movies that, you know, maybe an audience isn't really thinking about, but subconsciously it's hitting your brain space a little bit, I think. You talk about Gladys, the witch character, and what does she represent? Well, my main thesis on this movie, my main interpretation of it, is that she represents all the bad things in modern American society. She's a parasite. The movie isn't subtle about that. She's meant to represent politicians, lawyers, bureaucrats, old media, new media, tech companies, mining our data and our lives for profit, all these aspects of society, these classes of people that kind of feed off of everybody else, off of all the value and productivity and things we make, just so that they can somehow end up with all the control and influence and power. Everybody who's trying to influence the general population fill their heads with nonsense and politics and hate and rage and control and influence them with all these things for their own purposes, for money, for power, for influence. This is what the Gladys character is meant to represent. You know, she wears makeup, but it's clown makeup. She's very gaudy. The first time we see her, she comes into Marcus's office, right? She's wearing a red, white, and blue tracksuit. And she's just covered in makeup, maybe a little bit of a Joker reference there. But you know, this is the new modern America. It's all for show. It's not only ugly deep down inside, but it's also seeping out into the outward appearance of what America is now. There's no hiding it under the surface anymore. This movie could have very easily had a charismatic villain, a Wall Street guy, a slick guy, more like Donald Trump-like character, something like that, but it doesn't. In public, Gladys tries to make herself appear, you know, more youthful, more vibrant. She's got like daisy pens and flowers on her bag and all these kinds of things, but you know, it's an artificial vitality. Then the little boy Alex gets to see her true self, you know, a little older, a little sicker, a little more decrepit, kind of looks like a fortune teller or a gypsy or a witch or whatever. Gladys is a grotesque character, you know, she's grotesque looking. It's all there out right in your face these days. So anyway, visits Marcus, then later at their home, she's invited into their home. Like we invite all these things in our homes through the television or radio. These days, smartphones, you know, there's a whole scene, the movie takes time to show Josh Brolin staring at a radio tower. It's kind of what sets off his investigation. Why does Gladys only control certain people? Well, she goes into Marcus's home and his husband, he's very welcoming, very friendly. Maybe a little too friendly. Maybe Marcus is more on the money with that one, but I don't think she can target people who are that highly resistant to all the stuff that's going on or just too nice of people. You know, Miss Candy's kind of like that. She's maybe a little too idealistic, a little too nice, cares a little too much about the children deep down to where Gladys can't cast a spell of control over her, so she has to control other people and have them target her. Anyway, Gladys takes control over him. How does she take control over people? She rings a bell for attention. Just like you go on TikTok, it's just the bell ringing in your ears, or social media, or you turn on cable news TV. It's all attention-based, meant to grab your attention, influence people, cast your spells over them. Suddenly, Marcus is vomiting bile over his loved one. You know, she was able to turn family against family, smashes his face in. He's gone, changes the target to the next person. Lots of violence, lots of face smashing. So you have two very similar dream sequences back to back in this film. You have Miss Candy goes into her classroom and all her kids' heads are down. Then she sees Alex and he's wearing clown-like makeup, kind of looks like Gladys. She wakes up, she's on the ceiling. Then Archer, he's chasing his kid, goes to a bedroom, boom, it's Gladys. And it's a bit repetitive having these scenes back to back, I would say. You can call it foreshadowing or whatever, but really I think what the director's trying to communicate here is that these are two different archetypes. You know, you have a teacher and a blue-collar working man, resistant to Gladys' spells or influence to a point, but it's all seeping into their subconscious, you know, whether they want to recognize it during their waking hours. It takes the whole movie for them to discover Gladys truly, but you can't escape things in your dreams, in your subconscious. It all kind of leaks in there, you know, all these outside influences. The character of Gladys, she's walking around with this tree. She takes the branches. It's a thorny tree. I think the tree is really meant to represent America fundamentally. Energy, vitality, but also this thorniness to it, you know, the strength that America's always had. She takes the tree, she snaps the branches off, she twists things around it. She pricks her finger, drops blood in the water like she's chumming a shark. That's the power that she has over everybody. Just like all these other things that exist in America now, we all have power, influence over us more than the people in our own lives sometimes. You know, some people are just driven insane these days by politics and polarization and all the nonsense that's going on. I really think that's the heart of this movie. The young boy Alex, later, Gladys is talking to Alex and she says something like, I'm sick. I've been sick for a long while. What would make you feel better? I don't know, I thought consuming your parents would make me feel better, but it doesn't. How about all the kids in your school? So now all the kids disappear in this movie. They haven't really disappeared. They're down in her basement, dormant, waiting to be weaponized. She's feeding them ideas and influence, and then one day they'll be the adults. She'll be able, just like Alex's parents, to control them to the point where they're sticking forks in their eyes. It's interesting when she tells Alex to go get the personal items to control the children. What does he go get? He doesn't go steal their pencil boxes or whatever. He just steals their little personalized pieces of artwork that they slap on their little lockers or boxes or whatever. You know, that's interesting. He's stealing the little pieces of their creativity, of their souls. The little boy Alex, I think he's meant to represent, and maybe this is just my own personal lens here, but he's picked on by all the other kids. He's quiet, he's reflective. I think he's supposed to be like an artist type, you know, or a journalist or a writer, philosopher, however you want to look at that. But people in society who kind of sit back and examine things and think about things and eventually maybe affect change, which he does at the end. We'll come back to Alex. So then you have the police character and the homeless drug addict, and I don't think these two are really meant to represent anything other than what they are. You know, these two parts of society that you talk about police brutality, you talk about homeless and drug addiction. These are problems that have been existing for a while, but they're symptoms, you know, we never talk about the real underlying issues that cause these things to happen. We always try to address the symptoms, homelessness with money. Now the cops have body cam footage, and that's supposed to fix all the like social, economic problems we have going on in this country. It's just Band-Aids, right? The police in this film are pretty ineffectual. Their investigation goes nowhere, but if what we're actually talking about isn't so much physically missing children, but in fact children who have checked out mentally because of the influences of technology or whatever, then what are the police really supposed to do? You know, these are things that teachers and parents and society as a whole have to fix. I don't think this movie hates policemen. I think it's kind of sympathetic towards policemen because, you know, you talk about the fear of being stabbed with a needle, getting hepatitis or HIV. I think that's a real concern police officers have out on the streets, or EMT, or anybody who has to deal with transients and homeless people and drug addicts, people like that. It's a real fear. But anyway, their whole side story between the cop and the homeless drug addict, I don't think it really serves the story much. I think it's meant, like in real life, to be a bit of a distraction. There's some comedy in it, but the homeless drug addict ends up stumbling upon the children in the basement. Doesn't move the story forward at all. He just gets the cop, and then they both get co-opted by Gladys so quickly you don't even see that scene. It's just kind of assumed that politicians or whoever we're talking about is just going to go ahead and take these two people, take these two issues and use them and manipulate them for their own purposes, which is what you see in real life. Other things in this movie, you know, he's feeding his parents soup cans because they've already checked out, and I guess his parents would be millennials and he'd be Generation Alpha, but every generation has to take care of the older generations as they get older, and I got nothing against boomers, but does seem to be a generation that's kind of had everything in the world, and then they just you guys are kind of sticking around, refusing to give up power. I mean, the president's like 80 years old, a lot of people in power are that old. And we're talking about an older millennial director here, so maybe that's something he's feeling a bit more social commentary. Maybe not though, maybe it's just part of getting older, sliding into middle age there, and now you gotta take care of your parents. God help you if you have children, because now you're taking care of two generations of people. Little idiosyncratic things in this movie, you know, you got the kids Naruto running. I don't think that really means anything. It's just a bit of comedic nonsense fun. We're living in a post-irony, post-meme, post-internet world, so you get those kinds of things. Then there's the 2:17. What does that mean? Is it a reference to Matthew 2:17? I don't know. I don't really care. Like, sometimes in a movie there's just little things that get thrown in there, you know, this Lynchian idea of it coming from the subconscious, and not everything needs to be explained 100% perfectly. In fact, you probably don't want to do that if you're trying to make a movie or a piece of art that's gonna stand the test of time. There's all these little nods in this movie, like when Gladys goes into Marcus's office and they're talking about, well, where's his parents? And she says, you've got a touch of consumption. And it's funny, right? You know, nobody says consumption anymore. Nobody knows what it is. But also, the word consumption has a double meaning, you know, to consume things. So are we talking about they consume too much media, capitalism, whatever you want to read into it? It's got a kind of double meaning. I'll have to watch this movie again, but there's probably lots of things that have double meanings in it. Gladys has the windows of the house papered over so nobody can see inside, you know, for privacy, but also she's isolating the family from the rest of the outside world, and yet she still gets to exert her power and influence through, you know, all manifestations of, well, let's call it technology, but magic and spells or whatever. Going back to the little boy Alex, you know, the introverted artist type character. At the end of the movie, he becomes a hero. And how does he become a hero? Well, he figures out how to break the spell or to cast the spells like Gladys did. He figures out how to influence the children with art or music or literature or what, you know, the next generation of ideas, people influencing people. Breaks Gladys' spell, turns the children on Gladys, and in a grotesque horror-like fashion they go and they rip her apart. Kind of reminiscent of the End of the Substance, where it's just kind of over the top. This movie isn't as over the top as The Substance, but you know, that seems to be a trend in movies now. We're just gonna go over the top, and it's a bit of a hopeful ending that the next generation is able to correct a little bit of the mistakes or influence of the past generations. It's a little bit tempered by the fact, I think the narrator, the little girl, says something like, and then some of the kids even started speaking. Obviously there's still a sickness within society, but they were at least able to get rid of a lot of that, and that's kind of a hopeful message of this movie. You talk about violence in horror films. Sometimes it's gratuitous, sometimes it's just done for shock value, but if this movie's actually trying to say all the things I think it's trying to say, then maybe the violence is a little bit justified, because in America we can have our little protests and we can wave our little signs around, pat ourselves on the back. But if you look at the long history of humanity and revolutions and social change, seldom does that ever come not on the back of violence. Unfortunately, that seems to be the way of things, especially if we're talking about a ruling class or a power in society that itself uses violence to control people. Then I don't know if there's even an alternative at that point. So I'll go ahead and give this movie 3.5 out of 5, which seems kind of low. It should probably be higher, but the cinematography and the style and everything in this movie, it's good, but it's not anything I'm gonna want to really go back and revisit, I think. You know, there's some cool camera shots, but the lighting mostly tends towards that naturalistic flat style, and movies don't have to be beautiful. Every shot doesn't have to have beautiful lighting or cinematography, but it is kind of one of those things where, just for me personally, I do like a movie that looks a little better. And even when you're talking about horror, like Alien still looks awesome, The Thing still looks pretty good, and this movie, it's set in a suburban neighborhood, so it's gonna look a little mundane just based off of that. You know, the production design and such is just gonna be pretty ordinary, everyday things, everyday houses. It's the kind of thing where you're talking about Zach Cregger and he's inserting all this goofy comedy in there. Does the movie really need it? What's it really bringing to the movie? Personally, I would kind of like to have seen the movie be slightly more serious, or you just go full-on goofy comedy like Army of Darkness. Yeah. Or those early Peter Jackson films where it's just like, yeah, we're going there, we're going over the top. So for me personally, you know, maybe if I was a super horror fan, rated a little higher. I think it's sitting at 3.9 on Letterboxd. And it's also one of those movies where, you know, time will just tell how valuable it actually is. It's definitely a time stamp, a time capsule of the year 2025 to a large extent. Doesn't go overboard with that. Doesn't bring in technology and smack you in your face with it. Like I say, like they could all be texting and doing all kinds of pretty good film. I'd say go ahead and go to the theater and watch it, because what else are you doing? Watching some idiot on YouTube talk about it?